Keanu always said some people walk into your life like a quiet song, soft at first, then suddenly you realize they've changed everything. The night he met Sandra on that slick Seoul street, he had no idea her smile was hiding a war or that loving her would drag him into the sights of the most feared man in the city. He had just wrapped a long day on an action set outside Seoul, still half in costume, leather jacket damp from the drizzle. His driver took a wrong turn down a narrow alley where neon signs hummed and the air smelled like frying oil and cigarette smoke. It was late, and his security team had already left. Keanu liked it that way, less noise, more real life. He waved the car off and decided to walk the last few blocks alone, hands in his pockets, cap pulled low. For once, he was Keanu Reeves, the movie star. He was just a quiet guy wandering a foreign city, feeling small in a good way. He first noticed her because she was doing the exact opposite of what everyone else on the street was doing. While people rushed past with heads down and phones out, Sandra stood under a broken street lamp, holding her umbrella over an old woman digging through a trash bin. Her own hair and shoulders were getting soaked, but she just kept talking softly, pressing a few folded bills into the woman's hand, insisting she take them. There was something stubborn and gentle in the way she did it, not like charity, more like she was helping family. Keanu slowed down. That kind of kindness always caught his attention. It reminded him of why he still believed in people. When Sandra finally turned and saw him watching, she froze for a second, eyes widening in recognition. Most people reacted with noise, shouts, phones out, a rush of questions. She didn't. She just offered a shy, almost apologetic smile like she'd been caught doing something private. "Sorry," she said, voice quiet but steady. "I know who you are. I just didn't expect to see you here." Her accent was American, but the way she scanned the street, checking corners and shadows, felt almost military. Keanu noticed that before he noticed anything else. She was kind, but she was also alert, like someone who never fully relaxes. They ended up walking in the same direction, side by side under her umbrella. Rain tapped softly on the fabric as neon lights spilled across the pavement. She told him her name was Sandra, that she worked as an interpreter and part-time production assistant for foreign crews shooting in South Korea. She made a few funny comments about how clumsy some actors were with chopsticks, including a gentle tease about him trying spicy food. Keanu laughed, surprised by how easy it was to talk to her. There was no fake flattery, no trying to impress him. She asked more about his favorite books than his movies. It felt normal in a life where normal was rare. But underneath the easy conversation, there was a tension he couldn't quite place. Every few minutes, Sandra's eyes flicked to car mirrors, to doorways, to the reflections in rain-streaked windows. Her hand tightened on the umbrella handle whenever a black sedan rolled by too slowly. Keanu had seen that look on stunt coordinators' faces before a dangerous take, the look of someone always calculating risk. He gently shifted the topic, asking if she felt safe in this neighborhood. For a moment, something raw flashed across her face. Then she covered it with a practiced smile and said, "Safe enough. Danger doesn't really care about neighborhoods anyway." They stopped at a small late-night cafe with fogged-up windows and a flickering sign. Sandra pushed the door open and held it for him, insisting he go first, but Keanu noticed she scanned the room before stepping inside. The place was mostly empty, just a couple arguing softly in the corner and a tired barista scrolling on his phone. They ordered hot tea and sat near the window, watching the rain chase its own reflection down the glass. As they talked, Keanu found himself sharing more than he usually did with strangers. About loneliness in crowds, about how fame sometimes made kindness feel like a performance, about his belief that the smallest good deeds still matter in a brutal world. Sandra listened with an intensity that felt almost painful, like his words were hitting wounds she didn't show. At one point when he said, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay gentle," she looked away, jaw clenched, eyes shining too bright. She changed the subject fast, asking about his favorite action scenes and laughing at her own clumsy attempts at stunt training years ago. But the crack in her composure stayed with him. Keanu had met thousands of people, and he knew when someone was hiding a whole storm behind a calm surface. Outside, the rain finally slowed to a mist. It was close to midnight when they stepped back onto the street, steam curling from sewer grates like breath from a sleeping dragon. Keanu almost didn't ask for her number. He didn't like pulling people into his world. But something about Sandra made him believe that maybe, this once, it would be worth the risk. Before he could say anything, though, 3 black SUVs rolled up to the curb, engines low and heavy, like they were part of the night itself. Doors opened in smooth, practiced motion. Men in dark suits stepped out, their expressions flat, their eyes anything but. Sandra went pale, not the startled pale of a fan seeing paparazzi, but the bone-deep terror of someone who recognizes an old nightmare. Her hand, still holding the umbrella, began to tremble. The tallest man approached, rain beating on his perfectly pressed jacket. He didn't look at Keanu first. He looked straight at Sandra with the familiarity of someone who knew exactly how much power he held over her. Then in perfect English, his voice calm and cold, he said, "You broke your promise, Sandra. He doesn't know who you really are, does he?" Sandra didn't answer him. She couldn't. Her throat locked up, breath shallow, as if the very sound of that voice stole the air from her lungs. Keanu stepped slightly in front of her without thinking, just enough to place himself between her and the man in the suit. The street had gone strangely quiet. The hum of the neon, the distant traffic, even the drizzle seemed to fade beneath the weight of that moment. Keanu could feel Sandra trembling behind him. Whatever this was, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was history catching up. "Is there a problem?" Keanu asked, his tone polite but edged with steel. Years of training for fight scenes had wired him to assess distance, angles, numbers. 3 SUVs, at least 8 men, all moving with the relaxed confidence of people who expected no resistance. They weren't paparazzi, they weren't security, and they definitely weren't lost. The tall man finally shifted his gaze to Keanu, eyes scanning his face, recognizing him, then dismissing his fame like it meant nothing here. "This is not about you, Mr. Reeves," he replied calmly. "Step aside. She owes us a conversation she ran from for 3 years." Keanu felt Sandra's fingers clutch the back of his jacket, a silent plea not to leave her exposed. It wasn't fame that made him stay. It was that simple grip and the memory of her holding an umbrella over a stranger's head in the rain. People who risk themselves for others rarely do it only once. He wasn't about to walk away from that kind of heart. "If it's just a conversation," he said steadily, "we can all have it together, right here, in public." His eyes flicked to the nearby corner where a security camera blinked red. It wasn't much, but it was something. The tall man's jaw ticked. "You don't understand what you're stepping into," he murmured. "Her past belongs to us. She knows the rules." His use of belongs made Keanu's stomach twist. He glanced back at Sandra. Her eyes were wide, tears glinting but not falling. Shame, fear, and something like defiance battled across her face. She straightened a fraction, voice hoarse but clear. "Yi Min," she whispered, the name tasting like ash. "I told you I was done. I paid for everything. I carried your secrets." "I walked away." Her words trembled, but she forced them out. "You promised if I left quietly, you'd let me live my life." The man Yi Min took a slow step closer, rain darkening his polished shoes. Up close, his calm was more terrifying than anger. "You walked away from him, not from us," he replied. "And now you're standing in Seoul again with him." His chin jerked toward Keanu. "You think the boss won't notice that? You think the man whose brother you betrayed will forget your face on his streets?" Sandra flinched at the word betrayed, as if struck. Keanu's mind raced. Boss, betrayal, brother. This wasn't a random debt collector. This was organized, precise, and personal, and Sandra was in the center of it. Keanu could have backed out then. He could have told himself it was none of his business, that he was a foreigner in a world with rules he didn't know. But something old and stubborn stirred in him, memories of his own losses, of standing at crossroads where walking away would have been safer but wrong. He had promised himself years ago that if he ever had the chance to be the person someone needed, he wouldn't hesitate. Fame, comfort, fear of headlines, none of that weighed as much as the way Sandra's voice broke when she said, "Let me live my life." He drew a slow breath. "If her life is in danger," Keanu said, voice quiet, "then it is my business. We can go to the police right now." One of the men in the back snorted with dark amusement. Yi Min's mouth curved in a humorless smile. "The police," he echoed. "You think they don't eat at my boss's table? You think a few cameras will save her?" He leaned in just enough that only they could hear his next words. "This city remembers blood, not paperwork." Before Keanu could reply, Sandra moved. She stepped up beside him, no longer hiding behind his shoulder, though her hands still shook. "Stop," she said to Yi Min, her voice steadier now, forged in fear. "Don't do this in front of him. You want to drag me back, fine, but don't threaten a stranger. He has nothing to do with..." Yi-min cut her off with a look so cold it made her falter. You still don't understand, he said softly. Everyone you stand beside becomes part of it. You chose him the moment you let him walk under your umbrella. Keanu saw something shift in Sandra then. Guilt, heavy and crushing, crashed over her features. She looked at Keanu with eyes full of apology and unspoken stories. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to pull you into this. I thought I could outrun it. In that instant, he understood. Whatever mistake she'd made, whatever darkness she'd walked through, she had been trying desperately to live differently, to be kind in a world that had taught her cruelty. That kind of fight deserved backup. He squared his shoulders. You're not taking her anywhere, Keanu said, clearer now, no politeness left. Not tonight, not like this. Yi-min's expression finally cracked, irritation flickering under the surface. He signaled subtly, and two men stepped forward, their movements smooth, measured, not amateurs, not bluff. You're making a choice, Mr. Reeves, Yi-min warned. There is a point where courage becomes stupidity. Don't cross it for a woman whose hands are not as clean as you think. The accusation hit Sandra harder than any physical blow. She staggered half a step, eyes closing as if old images were flooding back, things she'd done or allowed or survived. Keanu caught the edge of that pain in her face, a silent confession he didn't yet understand. But he also saw the way her fingers, despite everything, still tightened protectively around the umbrella, still ready to shield someone else from the rain. People were rarely only their worst choices. He took one small step forward, closer to Yi-min than was safe. Maybe her hands aren't clean, he said. None of ours are. The question is who she's trying to be now. The nearest suited man shifted his weight, ready. Tension snapped through the air like a drawn bowstring. From the corner of his eye, Keanu saw a group of young tourists turn the corner, laughing, their voices echoing down the street, completely unaware of the storm they were walking into. Time seemed to slow. If this escalated, innocence could get caught in the middle. Keanu's muscles coiled, brain running through a dozen split-second options, cause a distraction, draw them away, stall for time. Before he could act, Yi-min gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The men in suits paused where they stood, like dogs ordered to heel. You want time? Yi-min said softly. Fine, I'm not unreasonable. 24 hours. You bring her to us at this address. He slipped a small, black card into Keanu's hand, his touch deliberate. If you don't, we won't come for her first. Keanu looked down at the card. No name, just a minimalist symbol and a set of coordinates. When he glanced back up, the SUVs were already loading, doors closing with expensive, final thuds. Sandra watched, shaking, as the last car pulled away, taillights bleeding red into the misty darkness. The street slowly filled again with ordinary sounds. A distant siren, the hiss of wet tires, a drunk man singing off-key. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Sandra turned to Keanu, eyes glassy, shoulders slumped as if the weight of years had settled back on her all at once. You should throw that card away, she said, voice flat with exhaustion. You should forget you ever met me. That's the safest choice. She tried to smile, but it broke halfway, twisted by pain. You don't know what I was part of. You don't know what he's capable of. Walking away might be the last kind thing you can do for yourself. Keanu studied her face, the war raging there between the desire to protect him and the terror of facing her past alone. He slipped the card into his pocket instead of the trash. No, he said quietly. The kind thing is not leaving you to fight this by yourself. Sandra's eyes filled, and this time the tears did fall, cutting clean lines down her cheeks. For a moment, she let herself lean into his presence, just enough to borrow strength. Then she drew back, hugging her arms around herself as if bracing for impact. If you keep that card, she whispered, you're stepping into a story where people don't always make it out, and before you decide that's worth it, you need to know who I really am and what I did for that man's boss. She took a trembling breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Because I wasn't just some interpreter, Keanu. I was the one who helped destroy his brother's life. Sandra's confession hung in the air like smoke, thick and bitter, refusing to clear. For a moment, Keanu just watched her, seeing not the woman who'd held an umbrella for a stranger in the rain, but the one who now claimed she'd helped destroy a man's life. The contrast felt impossible, and yet both truths were standing in front of him, shaking in a damp Seoul alley. He gestured toward the cafe they'd left minutes before. Come on, he said gently. If I'm going to hear this story, I'd rather it be somewhere warm, with tea that tastes terrible but at least exists. Inside, the cafe was nearly empty. The barista gave them a tired glance and went back to his phone. They chose a corner table far from the windows. Fluorescent light turned everything slightly harsher, but maybe that was fitting. Honesty rarely looked pretty. Sandra wrapped her hands around the hot cup Keanu ordered for her, though she didn't drink. Her eyes were fixed on the steam rising in faint curls, as if it were easier to talk to that than to him. "You're not going to like me very much after this," she said quietly. "I don't need to like you," Keanu replied. "I just need to understand you." Took a shaky breath. "I wasn't born into this," she began. "I grew up in the States. My mom cleaned houses, my dad fixed cars he could never afford to drive. We were always one bill away from disaster. When my mom got sick, we crossed that line. I was desperate." Her voice cracked on the word, thick with remembered shame. "A friend told me about a translation job in Seoul. High pay, no experience necessary, just fluent Korean and English. They paid the flight, the apartment, everything. I knew it was too good to be true, but I ignored the alarms. I told myself good people sometimes get good luck." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "The man who hired me wasn't the boss. He was the brother, Minyi. Soft-spoken, always in a pressed suit, always smiling. He handled the business that looked legal on paper. Import-export, shipping routes, logistics. I thought I was helping with contracts and meetings. I told myself I was just a bridge. Language, culture, nothing more." She let out a humorless laugh. "Denial is easy when the money pays hospital bills." Keanu listened, saying nothing. He knew the tone in her voice. It was the sound people made when they'd already sentenced themselves in their own mind. But he also knew that good people often arrived in bad places by small, understandable steps, not leaps into darkness. "When did you realize," he asked softly, "that it wasn't just logistics?" She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "The first time someone disappeared," she answered. "A local union leader who refused a contract. He came to a meeting, shouted about corruption, slammed his fist on the table. Minnie smiled the whole time, soothed him with promises. I translated every word. 2 days later, the man's car accidentally exploded. The news called it a tragic malfunction. But at the office, no one was surprised. They just moved on. That's when I knew. And I stayed anyway." The admission stabbed through the air between them. Sandra flinched at her own words like she'd been waiting years to be judged by someone who mattered. "Why?" Keanu asked, not accusing, just quietly demanding the truth. She swallowed hard. "Because by then my mom was stable. The doctors had found a treatment. It worked. And it was paid for with their money. Money I'd signed for, translated for, smiled for. I told myself I'd leave after one more paycheck, after one more operation, after one more month. But there's always another after when fear is driving." She rubbed at her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Then the boss's older brother, Yi-sung, came back from prison. He wasn't like Minyi, no suits, no gentle smiles. He was cold, efficient. He saw me as a tool, nothing more. He didn't like that I asked questions or that Minyi seemed to care what I thought. One night they brought in a young man, beaten but breathing, tied to a chair in the warehouse office. I was called to interpret the questioning. I didn't know until I walked in that the young man was a whistleblower, and Minyi's own half-brother." Silence fell heavy. Even the coffee machine's hiss seemed to hold back for a second. Keanu leaned in slightly, his voice low. "The one you said you helped destroy," she nodded, face pale. "His name was Hyun. He'd gone to the authorities with documents about the family's operations. He wasn't perfect, but he wanted out. He wanted something better for the people working under them. They dragged him back before he could testify. The boss wanted him broken. Minyi." Her voice softened with complicated memory. Minyi wanted to save him. He thought if Hyun recanted, if he blamed someone else, they could fake his death and smuggle him out later. She let the words hang there, then forced herself on. "They needed me to translate messages to overseas contacts, false statements, scripts, instructions on how to discredit anyone connected to Hyun. I had a choice. Refuse and watch them tear him apart, or comply and become the voice that helped erase him. I was so scared of them, of losing my mom's treatment, of dying in a warehouse no one would ever find." Her hands shook so badly the tea sloshed over the rim. "So I read their words. I signed the documents. I made the calls. I watched him look at me like I was the last decent person in the room, and I lied in 2 languages." For the first time since they'd met, Sandra couldn't hold back the sob that broke from her chest. It wasn't loud, but it was raw, years of contained guilt tearing loose. A couple of heads turned, the barista paused, then looked away, deciding it was none of his business. Keanu didn't move closer, didn't try to touch her. Sometimes he knew people needed space to unravel. What he did give her was presence, steady and unflinching. He let her see that he wasn't recoiling. What happened to Hyun? He asked when she could breathe again. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. He disappeared. Officially, he fled. Unofficially, I don't know. I never saw him again, but the boss's wrath turned on Minyi. He blamed him for losing control, for letting his own blood betray the family. Yi Min, the man you met outside, was assigned to watch me after that, to make sure I never talked, never ran. For a while, I didn't. I drowned in guilt and money, and my mother's improving lab results. She looked up finally, meeting Keanu's gaze head-on, as if daring him to think the worst. Then my mom found out where the money came from, not the details, but enough. She made me promise that if she survived, I'd walk away, even if it meant we lost everything. She said, Sandra's mouth twisted, voice thick with love and grief, "What good is my life if it costs you your soul?" She died 3 weeks later, peacefully. And at her funeral, I decided I'd rather be poor and haunted than rich and owned. A long, aching pause followed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Someone's phone chimed. Life, indifferent, kept moving. "So you ran," Keanu said softly. She nodded. "I took what I'd saved, the clean money, not theirs, and disappeared. New country, new name on some papers, new job doing the only thing I knew how to do, bridge people. I thought if I spent the rest of my life helping, maybe one day the scale would tip. Maybe it would matter that I'd changed." A bitter smile flickered. "But Yi Min found me last year. He said the boss was merciful, that if I stayed quiet and lived small, they'd let me breathe. Under one condition, never come back to Seoul." Her gaze dropped to the table. "And then you showed up," she whispered. "And I broke my own exile to help on a set I shouldn't have gone near because I missed home, because I was tired of being afraid of airports and addresses and accents. I told myself nothing would happen, that the past was asleep." She laughed suddenly, a sharp sound with no humor. "And then the universe dropped you under my umbrella and said, 'Let's see if you really believe in second chances.'" Keanu exhaled slowly, processing the full weight of it. She had been complicit, yes. She had also been cornered, manipulated, terrified, and then in the end she'd chosen to leave, knowing what it might cost. Courage didn't erase damage, but it mattered. "You're right," he said quietly. "This is a dangerous story, and you were part of things you shouldn't have been." He let that land. He wasn't interested in easy absolutions. Sandra flinched, but she didn't look away. "But I also see the person who stood in the rain to keep a stranger dry," he continued. "The person who walked away from money that could have made her comfortable because it was poisoned. The person who just told me the truth knowing I might hate her for it. That's not the same woman who sat in that warehouse and read their lines. People change, Sandra. Sometimes the punishment they give themselves is already heavier than anything the world could add." Her lips trembled. "You don't get it," she whispered. "It doesn't matter if I've changed. To them, I'm just a tool that went rogue, and now that they've seen me with you, they'll use you as leverage. They always go after what you care about. They can't imagine someone would stay without a chain." Keanu felt an old anger stir, not at her, but at anyone who measured worth only in ownership and fear. He'd played men like that on screen. He'd stared them down in life too, in smaller ways. They always underestimated quiet people. "So we don't play by their script," he said. "We don't just show up where they tell us how they tell us. You know them, their habits, their blind spots." A spark flickered in his eyes, part stubbornness, part something sharper. "You spent years being used by them. Maybe it's time you use what you know against them." Sandra stared at him like he'd suggested they fly to the moon barehanded. "You're talking about fighting them?" she asked, voice a mix of fear and incredulity. "This isn't a movie, Keanu. These men don't need special effects. They've buried people with less provocation than a missed meeting." He gave a small, wry smile. "I know it's not a movie, but movies taught me something real: choreography, planning, timing, anticipating reactions. You've survived them. That means you've been studying them for years, whether you meant to or not." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Even if that were possible, why would you risk it? You could walk out of this cafe, get on a plane, and never see Seoul again. You don't owe me anything." That was true, and they both knew it, which made his answer matter more. Keanu took a moment, choosing his words with care. "Maybe I don't owe you," he said, "but I owe the world a version of myself that doesn't turn away from people trying to be better. I've had my share of pain. I know what it's like to wish someone, anyone, would stand beside you when it stops being convenient." He leaned forward, his voice dropping into something deeply sincere. "You said you wanted the scales to tip, that you've been trying to spend the rest of your life making up for what happened. Maybe this is part of that, not just running, not just hiding, but standing up to the people who taught you fear in the first place." Sandra's eyes glistened, hope and terror warring inside them. "You really think we can beat them?" she breathed. Keanu held her gaze, not with false bravado, but with a steady, grounded resolve. I don't know if we can beat them, he admitted, but I know we can stop letting them decide who you are, and I know I'd rather risk something for that than spend the rest of my life wondering if I walked away from the moment it mattered. Sandra swallowed hard, her heartbeat almost audible in the quiet corner. The idea of fighting back wasn't new to her. She'd dreamed of it in secret for years. But dreaming in the dark and speaking it aloud with an ally sitting across from you were very different things. She looked down at her trembling hands, then up at the door, half expecting Yimin to walk back in. Her chest rose and fell, each breath a battle. Finally, she drew in one long, shaking inhale and let it out slowly. If we do this, she whispered, voice barely above a breath, there's no going back to normal, not for me, not for you. Keanu nodded once. I'm aware. Sandra stared at him for another heartbeat, searching for any flicker of doubt. Then with the smallest, most fragile nod, she crossed a line she could never uncross. All right, she said. You want to use what I know? I'll tell you everything, every route, every contact, every weakness I've seen them pretend they don't have. Her eyes hardened, a quiet fire kindling behind the tears. But there's one thing you need to understand before we start planning. The boss we're up against, he's not just ruthless. To him, I'm not an ex-employee. I'm the woman he once swore he'd marry. Morning found them in a cheap motel, curtains shut, city noise muffled. Sandra sketched Daniel's world on a notepad, tower, docks, routes, and one secret room. He keeps everything in a private archive, she said. Blackmail files, accounts, photos, I helped him design it. Retina scan, code based on a phrase he used to whisper. Even the rain can't wash you away. If that room burns, half his empire falls. Keanu listened, then nodded. So we don't just beg him to spare you. We walk into his tower and make sure he understands you can hurt him too. Sandra stared at him. This is insane. He loved me once, but that makes me more dangerous, not less. Exactly, Keanu said. You know where he's blind, we use that, not to become like him, but to force him to let you go. She looked at the door, fear and resolve warring inside. Finally, she folded the map. All right, one last time into his world, then we're done. Daniel's glass tower rose into a sky heavy with clouds. Inside, polished marble and quiet security swallowed them. Keanu's public face smoothed the way, smiles, handshakes, the cover story of a potential business meeting. No one questioned Sandra walking beside him. On the top floor, Daniel waited, sharp suit, stillness like a knife. His gaze slid past Keanu, locked on Sandra, and didn't move. You came back, he said. I thought you'd finally learned to stay gone. Fear isn't the same as wisdom, Sandra replied. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. We both know what's upstairs, your archive, your insurance, your weakness. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You think I'd let you back into that room? You already did, Keanu said quietly. By building it on her eyes and her memories, if anything happens to her or to me, what she knows goes public. It was a bluff, but they sold it hard. Daniel watched them in silence, then nodded toward the hidden corridor. Then prove it, he said. Open the door. The metal door to the archive waited at the end of the hall. Sandra pressed her eye to the scanner, every part of her screaming to run. The red lines swept her iris. Identity confirmed, the system chimed. The lock clicked. She just walked herself back into the heart of the nightmare. Inside, shelves, drives, and locked folders surrounded them. Yi Min slipped in behind, gun at his side. The door shut with a heavy finality. You have two options, Daniel said calmly. Tell me who else knows about this room, or die here and I erase you properly this time. Keanu stepped between Sandra and the raised gun. You shoot her, you inherit a different problem, he said. My face all over your building, every camera, every witness, every rumor. Even the people you own will panic. You don't survive that kind of heat clean. For the first time, doubt flickered in Daniel's eyes. This wasn't a back alley. It was his tower, his name on every brick. Sandra took a breath. You can kill me, she said softly, but you lose your last chance at doing something that isn't pure rot. Let me walk, clear Hyun's name, prove there's still one line you won't cross. His jaw clenched at Hyun's name. That wound was still open. Keanu held his gaze. You'll be remembered for what you do now, not what you say you are. Let one person leave. Fix one thing you broke. It won't save your soul, but at least it won't be completely empty when you're gone. The room went very still. For one suspended heartbeat, everything could have gone either way. Then Daniel exhaled a low, angry sigh. "Get out," he said. "Both of you, today you don't come back to my city, you don't speak my name. In return, I make sure no one touches you, and Hyun's record will be corrected." Yi Min's arm lowered a fraction. "Go," he murmured to Sandra in Korean. "Don't waste this." They stepped back onto the street as the sky finally broke open. Rain pounded the pavement, washing neon into blurred rivers of color. Sandra tilted her face up, letting the water soak her hair, her clothes, her fear. "Is that it?" she asked. "He lets us go and I just try to live." "It's not that simple," Keanu said. "He won't become a better man because of this, but you don't belong to his story anymore. What you do now, that's yours." She pulled out the black card from Yi Min, stared at it for a moment, then tore it into tiny pieces. The rain turned the fragments to ink and pulp, swirling them down a gutter. "For years," she said quietly, "I thought I was only the girl who helped destroy someone. Now I know I'm also the woman who walked back into that room and said no." "Exactly," Keanu replied. "You can't erase what happened, but you can decide what you'll be next. Let the guilt teach you, not chain you." At the corner, an old woman struggled with an inside-out umbrella. Sandra stepped forward without thinking, gently twisting the metal back into shape, sharing a small, kind smile. It was a tiny act, almost nothing, in a life built on too many heavy choices. But heavy choices are changed, in the end, by 1,000 small ones. As they walked away under a shared umbrella, the deep message of their story settled between them. You may not choose how your story starts, or every mistake along the way, but you can choose what kind of person you become after the worst chapter ends. And sometimes the most powerful rebellion against cruelty, corruption, and fear is to keep showing up as someone kind, brave, humble, and willing to stand beside another human being when it would be easier to walk away.